For heaven's sake, Mike, can't you just make a decision? I snapped, my patience wearing thin as I juggled a phone call with my biggest client and my husband's indecisiveness over dinner plans. Mike's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, Laura. I just want to make sure everyone's happy. I ended the call and turned to face him, exasperation etched on my face. It's just dinner, not world peace. Pick something. Before Mike could respond, our son Josh trudged into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Hey, Mom, Dad, what's for dinner? Your father hasn't decided yet, I said, shooting Mike a pointed look. Josh shrugged. Whatever's fine. I've got a ton of homework anyway. I felt a pang of guilt. At 16, Josh shouldered more responsibility than most kids his age. How about I whip up some spaghetti? Quick and easy. Sounds great, Mom, Josh said, already heading upstairs. Mike nodded, relief washing over his face. That works for me, too. As I started gathering ingredients, the phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and groaned. It's your mother. Mike's eyes widened. Oh, I forgot to tell you, she wants to talk to us about something important. I raised an eyebrow. Important enough to interrupt dinner prep? Maybe we should put her on speaker, Mike suggested timidly. Sighing, I answered the call and hit the speaker button. Hello, Miriam. Laura, dear. Miriam's saccharine voice filled the kitchen. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all, I lied, catching Mike's grateful smile. What can we do for you? Well, Miriam began, her tone shifting to one of practiced vulnerability, I've been thinking a lot about my living situation. This big house is just too much for me to manage on my own. I froze, a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew where this was going. Mom, Mike chimed in, are you saying you want to move? Oh, Mikey, Miriam cooed. I knew you'd understand. I was hoping. Well, I was wondering if I could come stay with you and Laura for a while. The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. Mike looked at me, his eyes pleading. Miriam, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that's quite a big decision. We'd need to discuss it as a family. Of course, dear, Miriam replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I wouldn't want to impose. It's just that I'm not getting any younger, and I miss seeing my Mikey and Josh every day. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she'd never shown much interest in Josh before. Mike, emboldened by his mother's words, spoke up. Mom, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can talk about it then. What a lovely idea, Miriam exclaimed. I'll bring dessert. Laura, dear, I hope you don't mind. Not at all, I managed, shooting Mike a look that clearly said we'd be discussing this later. After ending the call, I turned to Mike. You can't be serious about this. Laura, she's my mother, Mike pleaded. She needs us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. Mike, your mother has never approved of me. How do you think having her here will affect our family? It'll be fine, Mike insisted, his voice lacking conviction. Maybe it'll give her a chance to see how great you are. I laughed bitterly. After 20 years of marriage, she suddenly decides to give me a chance. Please, Laura, Mike begged. Just think about it. As I turned back to the stove, my mind raced. How had my well-ordered life suddenly spiraled into chaos? I'd always prided myself on being able to handle anything, but the thought of Miriam living under our roof sent shivers down my spine. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the very foundations of our family. As I stirred the spaghetti sauce, I couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to this dinner tomorrow night might be the biggest mistake of my life. I never thought I'd dread coming home, but as I pulled into the driveway, my stomach churned. It had been 3 weeks since Miriam moved in, and our once peaceful house now felt like a war zone. As I stepped inside, Miriam's shrill voice pierced the air. Mikey, dear, where are my reading glasses? I'm not sure, Mom, Mike replied, his voice strained. Did you check the kitchen counter? I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Hello, everyone, I'm home. Miriam appeared in the hallway, her eyes narrowing. Oh, Laura, you're later than usual. I had to start dinner without you. I'm sorry, Miriam. Work was hectic today, I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sniffed disapprovingly. Well, a wife should be home to cook for her family. In my day— Mom, please, Mike interrupted, shooting me an apologetic look. Laura works hard for us. I gave him a grateful nod, but Miriam wasn't finished. I'm just saying, Mikey, that a woman's place is wherever she chooses it to be. I cut in, my patience wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to change before dinner. As I headed upstairs, I heard Miriam mutter, "No respect for her elders." Honestly, Mikey, I don't know how you put up with it. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to turn around and give her a piece of my mind. Instead, I knocked on Josh's door. "Come in," he called. I found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by textbooks. "Hey, sweetie, how's the studying going?" Josh sighed, rubbing his eyes. "It's okay, Mom. Just a lot of pressure, you know?" I sat on the edge of his bed. "I know, honey, but remember, your mental health is important too. Maybe you should take a break?" "I can't," he said, his voice tight. "Grandma Miriam says I need to study harder if I want to get into a good college." My blood boiled. "Josh, listen to me. You're doing great, and pushing yourself too hard isn't healthy. Grandma Miriam doesn't—" "Doesn't what, Laura?" Miriam's voice came from the doorway, making us both jump. "Doesn't want the best for her grandson?" I stood up, facing her. "Miriam, we need to talk about this. You can't keep—" "Dinner's ready," Mike called from downstairs, inadvertently diffusing the situation. Miriam smirked. "We'll continue this later, dear. Come along, Josh. You need a good meal to fuel that brilliant mind of yours." As they left, I caught Josh's eye. He looked torn, and my heart ached for him. Dinner was a tense affair. Miriam dominated the conversation, praising Mike's childhood achievements and not so subtly comparing them to Josh's. "You know, Mikey was top of his class in math," she boasted. "Josh, dear, how are your math grades?" Josh squirmed in his seat. "They're okay, Grandma." "Just okay?" Miriam skied. "Well, I'm sure if your mother spent more time at home—" "That's enough," I snapped, slamming my fork down. "Miriam, I've had it with your constant criticism. This is my home, and I won't have you undermining me or pressuring Josh." The table fell silent. Mike looked between us, his face pale. "Laura, Mom, please." "No, Mike," I said, standing up. "It's time we addressed this. Miriam, when you moved in, we agreed you'd respect our parenting decisions, but you've done nothing but criticize and interfere." Miriam's eyes flashed. "Well, someone has to look out for this family's best interests. Clearly, you're too busy with your career to do so." "Mom," Mike exclaimed, finally finding his voice. "That's not fair. Laura's an amazing mother and wife." I felt a surge of affection for Mike, but it was quickly doused by Miriam's next words. "Oh, Mikey," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You've always been too soft. It's clear who wears the pants in this family. I just hope poor Josh doesn't suffer for it." As Josh pushed back from the table and fled upstairs, I realized something had to change. This couldn't go on. But as I looked at Mike's conflicted face, I wondered if he'd ever be strong enough to stand up to his mother. Little did I know this dinner confrontation was just the beginning of a storm that would tear our family apart. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. Creeping to the top of the stairs, I listened, my heart sinking with each word. "Mom, I don't know what to do," Mike whispered. "Laura's been so stressed lately." Miriam's voice dripped with false concern. "Oh, Mikey, I've been thinking, maybe it's time Laura took a step back from her job. For the sake of the family, of course." I gripped the banister, my knuckles turning white. How dare she? "I don't know, Mom," Mike replied, uncertainty clear in his voice. "Laura loves her job." "But does she love it more than her family?" Miriam pressed. "Josh's grades are slipping, and you're always so tense. A wife's place is in the home, Mikey. You know that." I'd heard enough. Storming down the stairs, I confronted them in the kitchen. "Is that what you really think, Miriam, that I should give up my career?" Mike jumped, spilling his coffee. "Laura, we were just talking about me behind my back," I finished for him. "I heard everything." Miriam had the audacity to look offended. "Laura, dear, we're just concerned about the family's well-being." "No," I snapped. "You're concerned about controlling everyone's lives. This ends now." Just then, Josh trudged into the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sweetie," I said, trying to soften my tone. "How did you sleep?" "Not great," he mumbled. "I was up late studying for my calculus test." Miriam pounced on the opportunity. "See, if you were home more, Laura, you could help Josh with his studies." "That's it," I exploded. "Miriam, I want you out of this house. Today." The kitchen fell silent. Mike looked between us, panic in his eyes. "Laura, please. Mom didn't mean—" "Oh, I meant every word," Miriam interrupted, her mask of politeness finally slipping. "Someone needs to look out for this family's best interests, and clearly it's not you, Laura." Josh's eyes widened. Grandma, that's not fair. Mom works hard for us. Stay out of this, Josh, Mike said, his voice strained. Laura, can we talk about this privately? I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. No, Mike. I'm done talking. Either Miriam leaves or I do. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mike looked torn, his gaze darting between his mother and me. Mikey, Miriam said softly, you can't let her do this. I'm your mother. I held my breath, waiting for Mike to stand up for our family, for me. But as the seconds ticked by, his silence spoke volumes. I see, I whispered, my heart breaking. Josh, go pack a bag. We're leaving. What? Josh exclaimed. Mom? No. Mike finally found his voice. Laura, please, we can work this out. But I was already heading upstairs, Josh reluctantly following. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, my mind raced. Where would we go? What would this mean for our family? Miriam's voice carried up the stairs. Mikey, you can't let them leave. What about my grandson? That was the last straw. I marched back downstairs, suitcase in hand. Your grandson? Josh is my son, Miriam, and I won't let you poison him with your outdated sexist views. Mike stepped between us. Laura, Mom, please. Can't we talk about this calmly? There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice ice cold. You've made your choice, Mike. You chose your mother over your wife and son. As Josh and I headed for the door, Miriam called out, You'll regret this, Laura. You're tearing this family apart. I turned back, meeting her gaze. No, Miriam. You did that the moment you moved in. With that, Josh and I walked out, leaving behind a stunned Mike and a fuming Miriam. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Mike in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. Mom, Josh said quietly, what happens now? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears. I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. 3 days after our dramatic exit, I found myself pacing the floor of Jane's guest room. My best friend had graciously offered us a place to stay while I figured out our next move. Laura, sit down before you wear a hole in my carpet, Jane said, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking. I'm sorry, Jane. I can't believe this is happening. She sat beside me, her lawyer face on. Have you heard from Mike? He's called a dozen times, I sighed. I haven't answered. Maybe you should, Jane suggested gently, at least to discuss Josh's situation. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Mike's face flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Laura? Mike's voice was strained. Please, can we talk? I took a deep breath. Fine. Talk. Mom's gone too far this time, he said. I've asked her to leave. My heart skipped a beat. You have? Yes, he replied. I realize now how much damage she's caused. Please, come home. We can work this out. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But then I remembered all the times Mike had failed to stand up for me, for us. I don't know, Mike, I said cautiously. A lot has happened. I know, he pleaded. But I love you, Laura. We can fix this. Before I could respond, I heard Miriam's voice in the background. Mikey? Who are you talking to? My blood ran cold. Mike, is your mother still there? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Laura, wait. I hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Jane looked at me, concern etched on her face. What happened? I relayed the conversation, my anger building with each word. He lied, Jane. He said Miriam was gone, but she's still there. Jane's expression hardened. Laura, I think it's time we discussed your options, legally speaking. As she outlined potential scenarios, divorce, custody arrangements, property division, my mind whirled. Was this really the end of my marriage? A soft knock interrupted us. Josh peeked in, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom, can I talk to you? Jane excused herself, leaving us alone. Josh sat beside me, looking more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. Mom, I heard you talking to Dad, he said quietly. Are you guys getting divorced? My heart broke. Oh, honey, I don't know yet. Your dad and I have a lot to work through. Josh nodded, then surprised me with his next words. I think maybe you should. What? I gasped. Ever since Grandma moved in, everything's been awful, he continued. Dad never stands up for us, and you're always so sad, Mom. I hate seeing you like this. Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into a hug. I'm so sorry, Josh. I never wanted you to be caught in the middle of this. As we held each other, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Miriam. Laura, This childish behavior needs to stop. You're hurting Mikey and destroying this family. If you truly love your son, you'll come home and be the wife and mother you're supposed to be." Rage boiled inside me. How dare she? After everything she'd done, she still had the audacity to lecture me? In that moment, something snapped. I realized I was done being the peacekeeper, done sacrificing my happiness for a family that didn't appreciate me. I looked at Josh, seeing the strength and maturity in his eyes. "You're right, honey. Things can't go on like this." Taking a deep breath, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. It's time to end this, once and for all. As I stood up, determination coursing through me, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Miriam had no idea what she was in for. This time, I wouldn't back down. This time, I would fight for myself, for Josh, and for the life we deserved. Little did Miriam know, she had just awakened a force she couldn't reckon with. The gloves were off, and I was ready for war. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Jane had helped me draft a plan of action, and I was ready to reclaim my life. But first, I needed to face Mike and Miriam one last time. As Josh and I pulled into our driveway, my resolve wavered. This house held so many memories, both good and bad. Taking a deep breath, I turned to my son. "You don't have to come in if you don't want to," I said softly. Josh shook his head. "No, Mom, I'm with you." His words gave me strength. We walked to the front door, and I used my key for what I knew would be the last time. The moment we stepped inside, Miriam's voice rang out. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." Mike appeared from the living room, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Laura, Josh, thank God you're home." "We're not staying," I said firmly. "We're here to collect our things." Miriam scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. This tantrum has gone on long enough." I ignored her, focusing on Mike. "I've made my decision, Mike. I want a divorce." The color drained from his face. "Laura, please, we can work this out." "Can we?" I challenged, "because from where I'm standing, nothing's changed. Your mother's still here, still controlling our lives." Miriam stepped between us. "Now see here, young lady, you can't just throw away 20 years of marriage because you're feeling a little unappreciated." Something inside me snapped. "A little unappreciated? You've done nothing but undermine and belittle me since the day you moved in. And you," I turned to Mike, "you've let her do it, every single time." Mike reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Laura, I love you. Please don't do this." "If you loved me," I said, my voice breaking, "you would have stood up for me, for us." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jane. "Emergency at the office. Need you ASAP." I looked at Mike and Miriam, suddenly realizing how small they seemed, how insignificant their drama was compared to the life I'd built for myself. "I have to go," I said. "Work emergency. Josh, can you start packing your things?" Miriam's eyes flashed. "Work? You're choosing work over your family? I always knew you were selfish, but that's enough." To everyone's surprise, it was Josh who spoke up. "Grandma, you don't get to talk to Mom like that, not anymore." Pride swelled in my chest as Josh stood tall, facing down his grandmother. Mike looked between us, confusion and hurt etched on his face. "Josh, buddy, what are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I'm going with Mom," Josh replied. "I'm tired of the fighting, of walking on eggshells in my own home. Mom's the only one who's ever put me first." Miriam gasped dramatically. "Mikey, are you going to let them leave? They're tearing this family apart." As Mike hesitated, torn between his mother and his family, my phone buzzed again. Jane's message flashed on the screen. "Laura, it's about the house. You need to see this now." A chill ran down my spine. What could be so urgent? I looked at Mike, seeing the conflict in his eyes. For a moment, I almost wavered, but then I remembered all the times he'd chosen his mother over me, over our family. "Josh, change of plans. We need to go to Aunt Jane's office right away," I said, my voice steady. "Mike, we'll be back for our things later. Have them ready." As we walked out the door, I heard Miriam's shrill voice. "Mikey, do something!" But Mike remained silent, and that silence spoke volumes. In the car, Josh looked at me, worry creasing his brow. "Mom, what's going on?" I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. "I don't know, honey, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." As we drove towards Jane's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. Little did I know, the bombshell waiting for us would alter the course of our future forever. Jane's office was a flurry of activity when Josh and I arrived. She ushered us into her private room, her face grim. "Laura, I'm glad you're here," she said, closing the door. "We've uncovered something troubling." My heart raced. "What is it, Jane?" She pulled out a thick file. "I've been looking into your financials, preparing for the divorce proceedings. Laura, there are some significant discrepancies." As Jane explained, my world tilted on its axis. Apparently, large sums of money had been systematically withdrawn from our joint accounts over the past year. Money I knew nothing about. "How much?" I whispered, dreading the answer. Jane's voice was soft but firm. "Nearly $500,000, Laura." The room spun. I gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady myself. That's impossible. I would have noticed." "Mom?" Josh's voice sounded far away. "What does this mean?" I turned to my son, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out." Jane continued, her lawyer mode in full swing. "There's more. The withdrawals coincide with Miriam's move-in date, and they've been transferred to an offshore account." The pieces started falling into place. Miriam's sudden interest in living with us, her constant undermining, her attempts to drive a wedge between Mike and me. It had all been a calculated plan. "She's been stealing from us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And Mike, he must have known." Josh stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "How could Dad do this to us?" I pulled him into a hug, my mind racing. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to find out." Just then, my phone buzzed, a text from Mike. "On our way to Uncle Bob's funeral. Why aren't you answering my calls? We need to talk." A cold determination settled over me. This was my chance. "Jane," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what are my options?" She leaned forward, all business. "We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts, and with this evidence, we have a strong case for divorce on grounds of financial infidelity." I nodded, a plan forming. "Do it, and I need one more thing." 20 minutes later, Josh and I were back home. Mike and Miriam would be gone for hours, giving us the time we needed. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Josh asked as we packed our essentials. I paused, looking around the home we'd built together. "No, honey, but I'm sure we can't stay here anymore." As we worked, I drafted a text to Mike. "I know about the money. Don't bother coming home. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." My finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. With a deep breath, I pressed send. Moments later, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Mike. I ignored them all. As Josh and I loaded the last of our things into the car, I took one final look at the house. So many memories, good and bad. But it wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. "Ready?" I asked Josh. He nodded, a mix of sadness and determination in his eyes. "Ready, Mom." We drove away, leaving behind the life we'd known. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and accept their betrayal. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As we pulled into the driveway of our new apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Miriam. "You ungrateful witch! How dare you accuse us of stealing? You'll regret this, Laura. Mark my words." I smiled grimly, feeling a strange sense of calm. The battle lines were drawn. Miriam wanted a war? Fine, she was about to find out just how formidable an opponent I could be. Little did she know I had one more ace up my sleeve. And when I played it, their whole world would come crashing down. The morning after we moved into our new apartment, my phone exploded with notifications. Mike and Miriam had returned from the funeral, and all hell had broken loose. "Laura, open this door right now." Mike's voice boomed through the intercom. I glanced at Josh, who was pale but resolute. "Should we let them up, Mom?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "No, honey, we're doing this on our terms now." I pressed the intercom button. "Mike, I told you, it's over. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Lawyer?" Miriam's shrill voice cut in. "You ungrateful hussy. After everything we've done for you." I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done? You mean stealing $500,000 from us?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Mike's voice suddenly small. "Laura, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied, my voice ice cold. "I know about the offshore account, Mike. I know about everything." More pounding on the lobby door. "You can't keep my grandson from me," Miriam screeched. Josh stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "I'm not your property, Grandma. I chose to come with Mom." Pride swelled in my chest, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Jane. "Laura, turn on the news, now." With shaking hands I flipped on the TV. My jaw dropped as I saw Mike's face plastered across the screen, the headline screaming, "Local businessman implicated in major embezzlement scheme." "Oh my God," I whispered. Josh's eyes widened. "Mom, what's happening?" Before I could answer, there was a commotion downstairs. Through the window, I saw police cars pulling up, officers rushing towards Mike and Miriam. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mike. "What have you done?" I stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part ached for the man I'd once loved. "Mom?" Josh's voice pulled me back. "Did you do this?" I turned to my son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "No, honey, I didn't know about the police, but I did tell Jane to look into Dad's finances." Josh nodded slowly, processing. "So what happens now?" As if in answer, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find two stern-faced detectives. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about your husband's financial activities." For the next 2 hours, Josh and I were interrogated separately. They wanted to know if I was involved, if I had benefited from the embezzled funds. By the time they left, I felt drained and hollow. I found Josh sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The news was still covering the story, now showing footage of Mike and Miriam being led away in handcuffs. "Oh, Josh," I said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." He clung to me, his body shaking with silent sobs. "It's not your fault, Mom. They did this, not you." As we sat there, holding each other, my phone buzzed once more. It was Jane. "Laura, I've got more news. The house, it's not just in your name. It's part of a trust set up by Mike's late father for Josh." I gasped. "What?" "Miriam and Mike have been trying to break the trust for months. That's where the money was going. They were paying off judges, trying to get control of Josh's inheritance." The pieces fell into place. Miriam's obsession with Josh, her constant criticism of my parenting. It had never been about family. It had always been about money. As the reality of our situation sank in, I realized this was far from over. We'd won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And as I held my son, watching our old life crumble on the TV screen, I knew one thing for certain. I would fight with everything I had to protect Josh and the future that was rightfully his. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were about to learn just how fierce a mother's love could be. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Jane. Across the aisle, Mike sat with his lawyer, looking haggard and defeated. Miriam was conspicuously absent, having been denied bail due to flight risk. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the courtroom. "We're here to finalize the divorce proceedings of Laura and Michael Thompson, as well as to address the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund. Let's begin." For the next hour, lawyers presented arguments, financial records were scrutinized, and witnesses were called. Through it all, I kept my eyes fixed on Josh, who sat in the gallery, his face a mask of determination. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. "Having reviewed all the evidence, I'm ready to make my ruling." My heart pounded as she continued. "First, regarding the divorce. Given Mr. Thompson's financial misconduct and the evidence of emotional abuse, I'm granting the divorce in favor of Mrs. Thompson." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "As for the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund," the judge continued, "I find the attempts by Mr. Thompson and his mother, Miriam Thompson, to illegally access these funds to be reprehensible." Mike's head dropped into his hands. "The trust will remain intact, with Mrs. Laura Thompson appointed as sole trustee until Joshua reaches the age of 25. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We'd won. It was over, but as I turned to smile at Josh, the courtroom doors burst open. Miriam, somehow out on bail, stormed in. "This is an outrage," she screeched. "You can't do this to my family." The judge banged her gavel. "Mrs. Thompson Sr., you are out of order. Bailiff, remove her immediately." As the bailiff approached, Miriam's eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I saw the full extent of her hatred and desperation. "You," she spat, "you've ruined everything." Before anyone could react, she lunged at me, her hands clawing at my face. I stumbled backward, shocked by the ferocity of her attack. "Mom!" Josh yelled, rushing forward. In the chaos that followed, I heard Mike's voice rise above the din. "Mother, stop! It's over!" The bailiff finally restrained Miriam, who continued to shriek and struggle. As they dragged her away, I saw something I never expected. Mike was crying. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd once loved, lost, broken, and finally free from his mother's control. "I'm sorry, Laura," he mouthed before being led away by his lawyer. As the courtroom settled, the judge called for order. "In light of this incident, I'm adding a restraining order against Miriam Thompson. She is to have no contact with Laura or Joshua Thompson." With a final bang of her gavel, it was truly over. Outside the courthouse, Josh hugged me tight. "We did it, Mom. We're free." I held him close, marveling at his strength. "Yes, we are, honey. We're free." Jane approached, a wide smile on her face. "Congratulations, Laura. You were amazing in there." I shook my head. "We were amazing. I couldn't have done this without you, Jane." As we walked away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. That night, as Josh and I sat in our new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I realized something profound. "You know, Josh," I said, "for years I thought I was fighting for our family. But really, I was fighting for us, you and me. We're the family that matters." Josh smiled, his eyes shining. "We always were, Mom. We always will be." As I hugged my son, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Miriam and Mike had tried to break us, but they'd only made us stronger. In the end, love, real, unconditional love, had triumphed over greed and manipulation. And as I looked at Josh, I knew that was the greatest victory of all.